Okay, so now that you've been introduced to the HTML and the CSS that we're going to need for our carbon footprint app, our form and associated style, now let's actually start coding this up because really that's what we're here for. And I already have this up, and so it's great to have this set up already. It looks nice. It's not just a plain without any CSS. We can see we have inputs, we have boxes, we have radio buttons. So what we're going to do in this first part is just set up the what we call scaffolding, the code that we need in order to get the number of people in the household. But in that process, we'll actually set up the way on an ongoing basis to get the other form inputs as well. So I have open week 3 that you already set up in the attendance. I copied in the part 1 and then the first 3 items in the README file. Now for my README file today, I actually have it open in edit mode because I ended up putting spaces in here so I would be a little more organized. By the time you see this, it may look a little different, but we'll handle that. All right, so in here, I'm going to go ahead and grab this one because the first thing we're going to write is this main initialization function. So we've written functions before. This one, init, okay, is going to be equal to, so we're naming the function, right? And then we're going to actually use the function keyword. We learned all about this last week. Not all about this, we got introduced to it last week, okay? And then in here, right, we know we need to use semicolons. And then in here, we're going to do a console.log, and that's why I grabbed that other content, was just to say, hey, our app initialization is done, right? It's ready. And now it says try to submit the form. We're not there yet. We just have this here, so when we are submitting the form later on, we'll already have that. Now, to actually get this to run, we're going to do something similar to what we did last time, okay? We're going to say document dot add an event listener, right? And what are we going to listen for? We're going to listen for the DOM content loaded. Remember, this is used in combination with the script defer, but also because there's just so much going on in when a web page loads, depending on all the things that has to be coordinated to make sure it's ready. And so what we say, hey, when the DOM is ready, right, then run init. Okay. Now in this case, this is a callback function. Now you don't see that the way it's written here, and we saw this pattern last week, but I'm just describing here what this is doing, right? So I'm actually going to decrease some of that space, right? Because this is really the comments that go with this, right? So this function is going to end up setting up all the event listeners. You'll see that in a minute. And then the DOM loaded event is critical here, and that's what's important. Okay, all right, so the next thing we're going to do, and let's just grab some of the content for this, is we're going to get references into the elements that we're going to work with. Okay, so let's get this one. We'll use const, okay, and then we'll get a reference to the main form. So in this case, let's do another one. There we go. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to, and this is kind of makes it a little shortcut, but also helps you understand where we're getting a reference, where we're setting up this reference to. In DevTools, I'm going to go back to Elements, and it is really good to start learning how to navigate these elements on the page. And we can see that that form, that opening form that has all the things in it that we're going to need, is got an ID on it, right? So I'm just going to copy that real quick. And so what I'm going to do in my code then, I'm going to say const, and I'm actually going to give it this same name of the ID itself. Okay, so document. Oh, right. So in this case, no, it's right. Like, wait a minute. Document.getElement get element by ID. Okay, and what's nice here is because it also is the it's ID, right? Okay, so let's do that one. We'll look at this in a minute, and we'll write a little more code. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and grab the next one, because the next one is going to be something we haven't seen before. Okay, so now what we want to do is, now that we have a reference to the form, now we actually want to reach in to that reference, okay, to this reference, and then grab the actual input for the number of people. Now, and what this means is the actual HTML code. Okay, so let's write that, and then we'll actually probably run DevTools to see it. Okay, so const, in this case, we're going to say household, right? Household members. I don't think that was on the form. So, oh, members input, right? So this is the actual input. Now, so this one is not going to necessarily match what the ID is. We'll go look at that in a minute. So in this case, it's going to be different in the sense that we're going to reference the carbon footprint form dot, right, query selector. So we're saying query this selector and find me, in this case, this pound indicates, and I'll show you this in the HTML in a minute, members. Okay, so look for, right, this pound household members, which by the way is an ID. So let's actually go look at this in the form itself. So if I come down here, I hit inspect, right, I can see that ID. So now what I'm doing is I have a reference to the form, and now I have a specific reference into one input based on its querying of the reference to the form, specifically to the household members. Okay, so that's great. That helps for sure, because then that allows us to target that. And we don't have to do get element by ID can sometimes be thought of as a little costly from a performance standpoint, but with modern browsers, not as much as it used to be. Okay, so now let's do one more. Okay, so what else are we going to need? Because look, we have the whole form, and on that form we have a button, right? So when we're looking at the form, we know it encapsulates everything, right? So when the user hits submit, it's going to submit the form, but we also have another thing, which is the clear form, right? So we have two buttons here. We have the calculate, which is going to take our input and do run our associated code to give us some output later when we get there. But we also have this button to clear the form. This is fairly standard practice. So we also need a reference too, because by getting the form, we actually then have a reference into the button, although you'll see how we'll handle this differently in a minute. Okay. All right, so let's do this. Did I get all the content? Did I have any other? Right, so let's get this. We're going to get a reference to, yep, there we go. So now we're going to do const, okay? So clear form, not from, clear form button, okay? So where this was an input, this is a button. So that's the difference. And again, these names are names I'm coming up with in order to help describe what it's doing. So now we're going to do the same thing we did on the form before. We'll say document get element by ID. Okay. So in this case, we could have gotten this, but off the form. Okay. Good. So now we have three references, one to the form, one to the input for the household members, and one to clear. So let's just make sure those are set up and working correctly. I'd go over to my code here. I would then, actually I'll set a breakpoint at the last one. I'll reload my page. And because these two lines have already run, I can see what that they are indeed, and you can see this by me rolling over this variable. And notice what's happening here. There's like 15 items inside this form. Now what's coming back from this is actually called a node list, or what we might more commonly call an array, which we'll deal with later, but it's basically a way, it's a data structure very common in JavaScript. And so when we look at household members though, like let's scroll up because I think this is a little easier to see. When we're in household members, There we go. Then again, if you scroll here, you can see the whole form. If you scroll here, you can see it's just that input. And now if we run this line, if we roll back up, then we can see that that is just the button. Okay, so now we have our references into the HTML, which is awesome. Okay, so now what are we going to do next, right? So we're going to write a function that's going to handle the form submission, and we're just going to set it up for now. Okay, now this is going to be more like our traditional functions. Okay, so we're going to say handle form submit. Okay, so is equal to a function. Okay, and now for now we're just going to console.log. Okay, form submitted. Okay, oop, there we go. Okay, so there. All right, let's go ahead and grab this. So this is the, and I should actually put function to handle form submission, because we're also going to write another function that's going to handle, which is the next one. We're going to handle the clear. Okay, so now we're going to say const. Okay, so in this case, handle, again, handle it, take care of it. Okay, handle clear form. Okay, so, and then equals, right, function. Okay, so again, console.log. So now we're going to say clear button clicked. Okay, so you can already start to see, based on just the console logs that I've placed here, what kind of event listeners we're going to be listening for, and we'll come to that in a minute. Let me make sure I got all. Okay, cool. Right, so now what we're going to do is now we're going to actually attach. So now that we have these references, okay, so first we have the references into the HTML. We have functions that are going to be called when our events happen. So now we actually need the events. So where would we attach our events, right? So think about that. So based on what we've seen so far, we would attach these inside of our init. Okay, so let's go ahead and get both of them. All right. So what we're going to do here is something we've seen before, and which is just the more times you see this stuff, hopefully the more clear it becomes. But it's really about getting your hands in there and actually doing it. So we're going to say now listen for an event on the form. Okay, we're going to do add event listener. We're going to listen for a submit. Okay, when that submit happens, okay, so unlike, right, so in this case, or actually, I'm sorry, like what we did down here, we're just going to say, because this is a callback function, we're going to say handle, right, form submission. So just keep this in mind, right, that these are functions that we're calling, right, in a what we call callback. So when this happens, you call this, and so we don't put in the parentheses, and that's just good to start understanding, because you will see this pattern again and again in JavaScript. Okay, so now let's do the next one, and then we can actually see if our code is set up and ready to go. So now we're going to attach a click. Okay, so now just like we did above, except now we want to do it to the clear form button dot add an event listener, right? And this time we're listening for a click. Okay, so in that case we're going to handle form clear form. Okay, so that's what I mean, if you were to read it just as what it's actually doing is listen for a click on the clear form button, and when it happens, when this happens, then do this, meaning call back, do this. So come back and do this. So when this happens, come back and do this. So now what we're going to see is, did we get everything wired up correctly? Okay, so I'm going to come over to here. I'm going to take off my breakpoint. I'm going to let it run. Again, remember, you really need to be walking through this to help yourself make sure you have a good understanding of what this code is doing and know how to find things. Okay, so now we have Right, so we have our init loaded, init has been set up. We have event listeners, and I showed you before, you could actually come over here and see we have a submit, and you might wonder why we don't have the button. This was something that I actually had to research myself. I think I ended up here. Yeah, I selected the button to see that as well. I guess by default, DevTools doesn't show it, but at least now we can see we have 3 event listeners. We're going to listen for, which has already happened, the DOM loaded, and now the page is sitting there listening for a click. Okay, and a submit. So let's actually do the submit first, right? So how would we see that this actually fired? Well, we'd see a console.log. We could just do that. So let's do this. Okay, now this one was interesting. It went by really quick. So let me actually come in here and set a breakpoint, because we're going to fix this in a minute. Okay, and again, I'm going to come up here, come down here, and now I'm stopping it. So we do know, right, that it actually did hit this line, which means this got fired. But you'll see in the next part why we have to do some more code in here, because on form submission, there's something specific that the form is doing, and we have to prevent that. Okay, so that one we know is working by the breakpoint, but we can't actually see the console.log because of the way form submissions are handled, okay, on the browser, and not in our code handled, but just the way the browser does them, because of kind of some legacy concepts, not legacy, but some way that the forms interact with servers and stuff like that. Okay, so let's actually take this off now, and now let it run. Again, we don't see it, but now this won't be true for the button. Okay, so for the clear, we can't actually see. Yep, we clicked it, and by the way, notice this one. So this is how many times you've clicked it. So what we know here is we have set up the scaffolding for listening to our events, okay, our references into the DOM. So now we can start filling in some of the detail of what we want to do when somebody submits the form or clears the form, and that's what we'll do next. So make sure you commit your code. You do have some things to check out, right? Explain the defer attribute in the script tag and the DOM loaded events, and describe how each are done individually, because this can be like, why do we need both? And again, the complexity of what's happening on modern browsers just requires us to handle and put more edge cases in place. Okay, and so what are the most common types of event listeners react to a web page? We've definitely dealt now with a click, a submit, and a DOM loaded. Now the event listener for a DOM loaded just happens when it loads the page. The other two are user inputs. So make sure you do your Git workflow, and then we'll move on to part 2.